At the company dinner, they called her a supported housewife. Everyone laughed, including her husband, so she revealed a secret that made everyone go silent, and her husband was in shock. The grand ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria was a universe unto itself, a glittering ecosystem where the laws of physics were suspended and replaced by the gravitational pull of power. The air, thick and cloying, was a heady cocktail of expensive perfumes, the faint animalic scent of polished Italian leather, and the unspoken, insatiable hunger for status that pulsed through every feigned smile and firm handshake. This was the annual gala of Horizon Construction, the apex of the corporate social calendar, an event where fortunes were made in hushed conversations by the bar. Alliances were forged over truffle risotto, and careers, sometimes, were unceremoniously shattered before dessert was even served. For Claire Bennett, now 45, this evening was merely another performance in a 2-decade-long run of a play she had never auditioned for. Her role was that of the perfect wife to Daniel Bennett, the company's brilliant, ambitious, and ruthlessly charming chief financial officer. She was not a person, but a prop, an elegant accessory whose primary functions were to smile with just the right amount of warmth, nod with unwavering support, and under no circumstances ever outshine her husband. Her existence in this world was defined by her relationship to him. She was a costly, beautiful ornament, meticulously positioned to reflect his light, never to emit her own. She moved through the opulent room with a grace born of long and weary practice. Her smile, a carefully constructed masterpiece of social engineering, felt like a mask hardening on her face. Her navy silk dress, a custom piece by a designer she admired, had been Daniel's choice. Tasteful and understated, he had called it, a phrase that Claire knew was code for appropriately invisible. The fabric flowed around her like liquid night, a stark contrast to the fiery rebellion that had begun to smolder deep within her. She greeted faces she knew intimately, but who knew nothing of her. She remembered that Mr. Abernathy's son had just been accepted to Yale, that Mrs. Gable's daughter was an equestrian champion, that the Harrisons had just returned from a month-long cruise in the Aegean. She was a walking, talking database of personal trivia, a social lubricant designed to make Daniel appear effortlessly connected and personable. In return, no one ever asked about her passions, her thoughts, or the life she lived when she wasn't orbiting her husband. To them, Claire Bennett had no world of her own. She was a pale, silent moon to his blazing sun. The evening progressed with the agonizingly slow rhythm of impeccably timed service and profoundly empty speeches. Claire was seated at the head table, a position of supposed honor that felt more like a gilded cage. To her right, Michael Harper, the company's COO and Daniel's longtime rival/friend, was already on his 5th bourbon. Michael was a man whose confidence was built on the shaky foundation of diminishing others. He had a particular fondness for targeting the wives at these events, perhaps seeing them as easy sport, or perhaps because their perceived dependence mirrored his own deepest fears. He leaned across the table, his movements sloppy, his breath a sour wave of expensive liquor that momentarily overpowered the delicate aroma of the sea base. "So, Claire," his voice boomed, a deliberate breach of the room's sophisticated murmur, instantly drawing the attention of the other executives at their table. "I've always been curious. What's it really like being a kept woman? Must be a sweet gig, huh?" He gestured vaguely with his glass, sloshing amber liquid dangerously close to the rim. "Daniel here, slaving away, a titan of industry closing multi-million-dollar deals, while you just have to worry about which yoga class to hit next, or whether the hydrangeas are fresh." The silence that followed was not long, but it was sharp and predatory, the electric hush that falls over the savannah just before a lion strikes. Then the laughter erupted. It began with Michael, a harsh, braying sound, and was immediately picked up by the others. It was a corporate, cruel cackle, the unified sound of a pack that has cornered its wounded prey. But the sound that shattered Claire's composure, the one that cut through 22 years of carefully constructed emotional armor, was Daniel's. He didn't just chuckle politely. He laughed, a full, genuine, belly-deep laugh. He raised his wineglass in a mocking toast to Michael, a clear gesture of allegiance with his wife's humiliator. In that single, heart-stopping moment, 2 decades of marriage, of silent sacrifices, of dreams deferred and ambitions swallowed, evaporated. It all boiled down to this: him laughing at her with them. Claire's world tunneled, the glittering chandeliers, the murmur of the crowd, the clinking of silverware. It all faded into a dull, distant roar. All she could see was Daniel's face, his eyes crinkling at the corners with the same genuine amusement he showed when watching his favorite comedian. She thought of the countless late nights she'd spent poring over his quarterly reports, her background in economics, allowing her to catch subtle but critical errors his team of high-paid analysts had missed. She thought of the evenings she'd spent as his uncredited speechwriter and therapist, soothing his crippling panic attacks before major presentations, feeding him the very lines that would earn him standing ovations. She thought of the elaborate dinner parties she'd hosted, where her effortless charm and sharp intellect had smoothed the way for deals he would later claim as his own solitary conquests. And most vividly, she thought of her father's life insurance policy. He had been a Wall Street veteran, a quiet genius who had taught her to read the markets not as a science, but as poetry. The substantial sum he'd left her was a secret she had guarded for 7 years, a hidden wellspring of power that Daniel believed she had frivolously spent on renovating their Martha's Vineyard cottage and funding his exorbitant country club membership. Something deep inside Claire, a load-bearing wall she had built to protect her innermost self, did not just crack, it disintegrated. But it wasn't a collapse into despair, it was a detonation, a liberation. The fear that had been her constant companion for years, fear of embarrassing Daniel, fear of being too much, fear of being seen, vanished, replaced by a glacial, terrifying clarity. Her polite, practiced smile didn't falter. In fact, it deepened, transforming into something new and dangerous. With a hand that was suddenly rock-steady, she set her wineglass down on the pristine linen tablecloth. The soft, deliberate clink of the crystal was almost inaudible, but to her it sounded like the cocking of a gun. She turned her gaze to Michael, but her words were a net cast over the entire room, over the entire empire that had for so long dismissed her as a decorative zero. "That's an interesting question, Michael," she said. Her voice was calm, melodic, yet it carried a weight that made the lingering chuckles die in their throats. "But I have a better one for you." She paused, letting the silence stretch, pulling the focus of every person at the table and the tables nearby directly to her. "How does it feel to know that this kept woman, who you think does nothing but pick out yoga classes, owns 62% of Horizon Construction?" The ballroom didn't just fall silent, it became a vacuum. Sound itself seemed to have been sucked out of the room, leaving only the high-pitched hum of collective shock in its wake. Glasses froze halfway to lips. Forks hovered, forgotten, over plates of cooling food. Michael Harper's smug, alcohol-flushed smirk collapsed as if his facial muscles had been severed, leaving behind a pale, slack-jawed mask of disbelief. At the head of the table, James Caldwell, Horizon's imperious CEO, choked on a sip of water, his sputtering coughs the only sound in the void. But Claire's gaze was a physical force, locked on one person and one person only, her husband. Daniel's face was a horrifying, rapid-fire slideshow of emotions. The amused flush drained away, replaced by the mottled red of shame, which in turn gave way to the stark, bloodless white of pure panic. His hand, which had been resting on his wineglass, trembled violently. The glass slipped from his grasp, falling to the marble floor where it shattered with a sound like breaking bones. The expensive red wine pooled around his designer shoes, a dark, spreading stain that looked chillingly like blood under the opulent light of the chandeliers. No one moved to clean it. No one dared to breathe. The invisible wife, the decorative spouse, the kept woman, had just revealed herself as the empress of their entire world. And by the cold, resolute fire in her eyes, it was clear she wasn't there to rearrange the flowers. She was there to raze the whole damn building to the ground, brick by glittering brick. Time in the Waldorf's grand ballroom seemed to have fractured. The seconds after Claire's declaration stretched into an agonizing, distorted eternity, each moment thick with disbelief and dawning horror. The air itself felt crystalline, as if a single wrong move could shatter the fragile silence into a million panicked pieces. James Caldwell, Horizon's CEO, was the first to claw his way out of the paralysis, his face a mask of sputtering indignation, though a tremor of fear now undermined his blustering tone. "Claire, what in God's name are you talking about?" he demanded, his voice a hoarse whisper that barely carried. "This is a pathetic stunt. Apex Ventures? We know who owns Apex. It's a highly respected hedge fund out of London, a consortium of old money and institutional investors. We spent months in due diligence with their legal team. I've spoken to their representatives myself. He was trying to reassert control, to paint her as a hysterical woman seeking attention, but the seed of doubt had already been planted, and it was beginning to sprout with terrifying speed." Claire turned her head slowly to face him, an almost imperceptible movement that was nonetheless captivating. The mask of the polite, accommodating wife had not just been removed, it had been incinerated. In its place was the face of a strategist, a queen on a chessboard of her own design. Her expression was one of quiet, unassailable power, an authority she had kept so deeply hidden for so long that its sudden emergence felt almost supernatural. "No, James," she corrected him, her voice remaining level, almost conversational, which only made her words more devastating. "You dealt with my lawyers. You spoke with representatives who were on my payroll. You sent your confidential quarterly reports to a secure post office box in the Cayman Islands, which were then immediately and discreetly forwarded to my home office." She paused, letting a small, cold smile touch her lips. "The one Daniel so generously referred to as the room where I pursued my online pottery classes. The London Hedge Fund, the consortium of investors, it's all a beautifully crafted fiction. A series of shell companies and legal firewalls designed for one purpose, to ensure my complete and total anonymity. Apex Ventures isn't a fund, James. It's a person. It's me." To punctuate her statement, she retrieved her smartphone from the small, elegant clutch that lay on the table. A gift from Daniel, who had patronizingly called it a little toy for your social media. With a few deft taps on the screen, she brought up a document. The Apex Ventures letterhead was stark and official at the top of the screen. Below it was a summary of controlling shares in Horizon Construction, 62%, and at the bottom, her digital signature, crisp and irrefutable, Claire E. Bennett, President and sole shareholder. She didn't need to pass the phone around for inspection. The mere sight of it in her hand, held up like a royal scepter, was enough for the impossible, world-altering truth to begin its slow, agonizing crawl into their minds. "Let me refresh your memory," Claire's voice, though still quiet, now filled the cavernous silence of the ballroom. Each word landed with the deliberate, destructive force of a wrecking ball. 7 years ago, Horizon Construction was not the titan it is today. It was a sinking ship, 48 hours from declaring Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Do you remember that, gentlemen? Her gaze swept across the pale, frozen faces at the table. Sterling Builders was circling like a shark, preparing to swallow you whole in a hostile takeover. Your stock was trading for pennies, worth less than the paper it was printed on. 3 of your largest clients had already jumped ship, terminating contracts worth hundreds of millions. The board was holding emergency meetings at 2 in the morning, desperately praying for a miracle. She let the memory of that collective, existential despair hang in the air, a ghost at their feast. She could see the flicker of recognition in their eyes, the remembered terror of staring into the abyss of total failure. And then, as if by magic, the miracle arrived, she continued, her tone dripping with irony. Apex Ventures, a sudden, massive cash injection that seemed far too good to be true, a complete restructuring of your crippling debt, new lines of credit extended overnight. The only price for this salvation was majority control, 62% of the company's shares. You sold the very soul of Horizon to an anonymous savior, and you were so blinded by desperation that you never once stopped to ask the most important question: who was really behind the money? Her gaze, a laser beam of judgment, finally landed on Daniel. He was still frozen in his chair, a statue of ruin, the spreading pool of red wine at his feet, a grim, prophetic omen. You remember that time, don't you, honey? The term of endearment was a poisoned dart. You'd come home utterly broken, convinced your career was over before it had truly begun. You'd pace the length of our penthouse, night after night, muttering about ruin. And I would hold you, and I would tell you that everything would be okay, that you were too talented, too brilliant to fail. Her voice dropped, becoming a conspiratorial whisper that was somehow more chilling than a shout. What I didn't tell you, Daniel, was that after you finally cried yourself to sleep, I would go into my pottery studio and spend the rest of the night on encrypted calls with my lawyers and bankers, structuring the very bailout that would save your company. The life insurance my father left me, the money you smugly assumed I had blown on designer handbags and frivolous spa days, was the capital that saved your skin. The revelation struck Daniel with the force of a physical blow. He visibly recoiled, a strangled gasp escaping his lips. His entire career, his identity as a self-made man, was a lie. His promotion to CFO, the crowning achievement he had celebrated for years as the ultimate validation of his genius, was now revealed to be nothing more than a gift, a calculated move by the woman he had just publicly humiliated. "Your promotion," Claire continued, her voice relentless, reading the dawning horror on his face. "The board wanted to bring in an outsider, someone with a more impressive resume. But Apex Ventures, which is to say I, insisted on an internal hire. I instructed my lawyers to push your name, to argue that you were the undiscovered talent who could right the ship. I wanted you to have your chance to shine, Daniel. I genuinely believed in you. I thought that if you were given real power, you would finally become the man I had once hoped you were." She shook her head, a gesture of profound, sorrowful disappointment. What a colossal, heartbreaking miscalculation. Each word was another nail hammered into the coffin of Daniel's ego. The architect of his own success was, in fact, nothing more than a pawn in his wife's long and silent chess game. The woman whose opinions he dismissed as housewife nonsense, the woman he mocked at dinner parties, was the secret architect of his entire professional life. With a finality that left no room for argument, Claire stood. Her movement was fluid and imbued with a newfound authority that seemed to alter the very atmosphere around her. She smoothed the front of her silk dress, not with the nervous insecurity of before, but with the calm, decisive air of a general who had just won a war. "Enjoy the rest of the gala, gentlemen," she said, her voice cool and crisp. "I suggest you make the most of it. Tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. Sharp, my forensic audit team will be arriving at Horizon's headquarters. I would advise you to have plenty of coffee ready. It's going to be a very, very long day." She turned and began to walk toward the grand exit, her heels clicking on the marble floor with the steady, rhythmic beat of a metronome, marking the end of an era. She did not look back. She didn't need to. She could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes on her, a potent cocktail of fear, raw hatred, and for the very first time, a deep and terrified respect. She glided past tables of people who had ignored her all evening, their occupants now shrinking away, as if her very presence could scorch them. As she reached the towering glass doors of the Waldorf, a man in a discreet dark suit opened them for her. It was her private driver, a service she had maintained in secret for years. He stood beside a sleek black Bentley Mulsanne, her car not a company car, a vehicle Daniel had never seen before. "Home, Miss Bennett?" he asked, his tone perfectly professional, betraying nothing. Claire slid into the plush leather of the back seat, the door closing with a soft, satisfying thud that sealed off the world she was leaving behind. The car pulled away from the curb, gliding silently into the glittering chaos of the Manhattan night. The city's lights blurred past the window, a river of neon promises. For the first time in 22 years, she was not Daniel's wife, or Sarah's mother, or the perfect hostess. She was simply Claire. And as she took a deep, cleansing breath of the filtered air in the car she had bought with her own money, a colossal, crushing weight lifted from her soul. It was the burden of invisibility. And the feeling that rushed in to fill the void was dizzying, dangerous, and absolutely unequivocally glorious. It was the feeling of freedom. Monday morning broke over New York City with a harsh, unforgiving light, the kind of grey, steely dawn that offers no mercy to hangovers, sleepless nights, or guilty consciences. On the 50th floor of the Horizon construction headquarters in Midtown, the atmosphere was not merely funereal, It was thick with a palpable, suffocating dread. The opulent, sun-drenched offices, usually buzzing with the arrogant hum of commerce, were now as silent as a tomb. Claire's earth-shattering revelation from the gala had spread through the company's upper echelons like a virus, transforming the usual executive swagger into a paranoid, whispered fear. They waited, not knowing the precise form the execution would take, but utterly certain that the ground beneath their feet had turned to quicksand. At 8 a.m., sharp, the polished steel elevator doors slid open with a soft, ominous chime, and the waiting ended. Claire Bennett stepped out, a figure transformed. Gone was the elegant but understated silk of the gala. Today she was clad in a tailored charcoal suit of military precision, its sharp lines and dark color a declaration of war. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant chignon, and her face, free of the strained smile she had worn for decades, was a mask of cold, focused resolve. She was no longer an accessory. She was the commander. At her side, a step behind but radiating an energy that was just as formidable, was Rachel Cohen. One of Manhattan's most feared and respected corporate litigators, Rachel was a compact woman with short, dark hair, thick-rimmed glasses, and an aura of predatory intelligence. She was known for her encyclopedic knowledge of corporate law and a relentless take-no-prisoners approach that had made grown men weep in depositions. She carried a worn leather briefcase that seemed to bulge with the weight of the fates it contained. Behind them, a team of 4 forensic auditors, young, hungry, and sharp-eyed, followed in lockstep, their identical metal briefcases glinting under the fluorescent lights, each one a promise of a coming reckoning. The small army crossed the marble floor of the executive suite, in a silence that was more intimidating than any shout. The rhythmic click of Claire's and Rachel's heels was the only sound, a percussive countdown to destruction. Assistants froze mid-keystroke. The incessant ringing of phones ceased as if by a single command. Heads, once bowed in sycophantic diligence, slowly peeked over the tops of cubicles, eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe, tracking the procession as it marched inexorably toward the main boardroom. This was the same room where, for years, the decisions that had systematically erased Claire from her own life had been made. Today, it would be a courtroom. "Good morning, everyone," Claire's voice, calm and measured, cut through the thick tension. It resonated with a newfound authority that seemed to vibrate in the very air. "This is Rachel Cohen, of Cohen, Adler, and Stern. She and her team are here, at my explicit request as the majority shareholder of this company, to conduct a full and unrestricted internal audit." Her gaze swept across the assembled executives who had scrambled from their offices, their faces pale and drawn. "I expect your complete and unconditional cooperation. Let me be perfectly clear. Any attempt to obstruct this investigation, to delete or alter files, or to deny access to any requested information will not be viewed as a simple act of non-compliance. It will be treated as an immediate and legally binding admission of guilt, with all the severe legal and financial consequences that entails." Rachel Cohen stepped forward and snapped open her briefcase on the gleaming mahogany boardroom table. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. "We will begin with the complete financial records for the past 7 years, she announced, her voice crisp and devoid of emotion. "We require unrestricted administrator-level access to all company servers, all executive email accounts, both active and archived, all expense reports, all vendor contracts and payment histories, and all corporate travel records. We need it now." The undercurrent of panic that had been simmering since Saturday night erupted into a full-blown, silent flood. Michael Harper, the jester of the gala, was visibly sweating, his face a blotchy red as he fumbled with his tie, which suddenly seemed to be strangling him. James Caldwell, the CEO, attempted to project an air of composure, but his hands trembled so violently he could barely hold his phone as he made the call to the head of the IT department. The hunt had officially begun, and the hunters were not playing for sport. Claire did not stay to witness the initial dismantling. Her presence had served its purpose. She had another, more personal matter to attend to. She returned to the sprawling Upper East Side penthouse that now felt less like a home and more like a command center. Daniel was there, a ghost haunting the sunlit living room. He was still wearing the same tuxedo from the gala, now hopelessly crumpled and stained, a pathetic costume of his former glory. His face was swollen, his eyes bloodshot from a weekend fueled by alcohol and despair. The once powerful man who had commanded boardrooms with a flick of his wrist was now a broken, shambling wreck. "Claire, for the love of God," he began, his voice a raw, desperate rasp. "We have to talk. What are you doing? You're going to destroy everything. The company, my career, our entire life." "Our life?" Claire's voice was as sharp and cold as a shard of broken glass. She turned to face him, and for the first time in their marriage, he instinctively took a step back. "What life are you referring to, Daniel? The one where I served as your unpaid assistant, your round-the-clock therapist, your personal event planner, and your silent business partner, all while you and your sycophantic buddies laughed at my expense? That life ended on Saturday night." "It was a joke, Claire, a stupid drunken joke," he pleaded, his desperation making him sound pathetic. "You know what Michael is like. I got caught up in the moment." "It didn't mean anything." "Didn't mean anything?" She advanced on him, her quiet fury a palpable force. "You, laughing at my public humiliation, didn't mean anything? 22 years of marriage, Daniel, and in the moment of truth, your loyalty was with the man who called me useless, not with me. That wasn't a joke. It was the truth finally slipping its leash. It's how you all truly see me, and for that, I am profoundly grateful. You finally gave me the clarity I so desperately needed." He reached a trembling hand toward her, his face a mask of pleading. "Please, call off this audit. We can fix this. I'll do anything. I'll apologize publicly. I'll issue a statement giving you full credit for saving the company, but please don't burn it all to the ground. Think of our family. Think of Sarah." The mention of their daughter was a low blow, but Claire was fortified against it. "I thought of our family for 22 years, she said, her voice now utterly devoid of emotion, a flat line of finality. "I thought of our family when I turned down a full scholarship to Stanford's MBA program so I could follow you to New York for your promotion. I thought of our family when I used every last cent of my father's inheritance to secretly save your company instead of starting my own. I have spent my entire adult life thinking of this family." She paused, her eyes locking with his. "Now for the very first time I am thinking of me, and I am thinking of all the other women you and your kind have rendered invisible." That afternoon, the first fruits of the audit began to arrive, and they were more rotten than even Claire had dared to imagine. Rachel Cohen called, her voice vibrating with the grim, electric glee of a prosecutor who has just found the smoking gun. "We've hit the mother lode, Claire. It's not just one jackpot. It's a whole casino of corruption. We have business trips to private islands in the Bahamas, complete with yacht rentals and champagne receptions, all billed as geological site visits. We've uncovered multi-million-dollar consulting contracts awarded to a shell corporation registered to James Caldwell's brother-in-law, a man who is by profession a landscape gardener. We have a clear pattern of inflated invoices from key vendors, with kickbacks being funneled directly into the personal offshore accounts of at least 3 directors, including Michael Harper." Rachel's voice was grimly triumphant. "It's a scheme of such breathtaking arrogance, so big and so old, they stopped even bothering to cover their tracks properly." Claire felt a cold wave of validation wash over her. Her suspicions, long dismissed by Daniel as paranoid fantasies, were not only true but were far worse than she had envisioned. She gave the order, her voice steady. "Leak it, anonymously. Start with the Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg. I don't want this to be a corporate memo. I want it to be a public execution. I want their reputations to bleed out in the headlines before the bodies even hit the ground." By the next morning, the headlines had exploded across the financial world. The Wall Street Journal: Horizon Construction faces internal probe over massive fraud allegations. Stock plummets in pre-market trading. The New York Times: Leaked documents suggest wide-ranging corruption scheme at the heart of Horizon's C-suite. The news spread like wildfire through the veins of Wall Street. Horizon's stock, which had already been shaken by the rumors from the gala, now went into a catastrophic freefall. The name Horizon, once a beacon of stability and power, was now irrevocably mired in the filth of scandal. With every new article, every leaked document, the carefully constructed reputations of the men who had laughed at Claire were being publicly and systematically dismantled. and in direct proportion, her power, the mysterious unseen force behind the upheaval, grew, taking on a mythic quality. The kept woman was becoming a queen, and her castle was being built upon the smoking ruins of their fallen empire. A week after the gala, a week that felt like a lifetime, the boardroom on the 50th floor of Horizon's headquarters was no longer a place of power, but a chamber of judgment. The 12 members of the board, a collection of men who just days before had considered themselves titans of industry and masters of their universe, were now assembled around the vast, polished mahogany table with the grim, silent posture of defendants awaiting an unavoidable sentence. The air, usually cool and crisp, felt heavy and suffocating, thick with the stench of fear, betrayal, and impending doom. Copies of the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and Bloomberg Businessweek were scattered across the table, their damning headlines serving as epitaphs for the careers about to be extinguished. On the large screen at the end of the room, the stock ticker for Horizon Construction was a relentless cascading waterfall of red, a graphic representation of a corporate empire in cardiac arrest. The heavy oak doors swung open without a preliminary knock. The sound, in the tomb-like silence, was as startling as a thunderclap. Claire Bennett entered, followed closely by Rachel Cohen. If her previous appearance had been a declaration of war, today's was a proclamation of victory. She wore a stark, impeccably tailored white suit. In any other context, it might have been the color of peace or surrender, but on her, against the backdrop of dark wood and darker moods, it was the color of absolute sovereignty. It was the armor of a queen who had come not to negotiate, but to claim her throne. She did not move to one of the empty, subordinate chairs along the side. Instead, with slow, deliberate steps that seemed to measure out the final seconds of the old guard's reign, she walked directly to the head of the table. There sat James Caldwell, no longer imperious, but shrunken, a man lost in the cavernous leather of the chairman's seat. Claire stopped beside him. She did not speak. She did not gesture. She simply stood there, her presence an undeniable, immovable force. The silence stretched, thick and unbearable. It was a power play of exquisite cruelty. Finally, James looked up, his face a haggard roadmap of sleepless nights and shattered pride, aged a decade in a single week. "This is the chairman's seat," he mumbled, the words a pathetic, reflexive ghost of his former authority. "Exactly," Claire replied, her voice soft, yet carrying the finality of a judge's gavel. The message, unspoken but perfectly clear, hung in the air. "This is the chairman's seat, and you are no longer the chairman." Under the transfixed gaze of every man in the room, James Caldwell, the man who had built a personal fortune on the company's rotten foundations, slowly, painfully, rose to his feet. With trembling hands, he gathered his few papers, useless relics of a power that had already evaporated, and shuffled to a vacant chair on the side. It was a public, humiliating abdication. Claire sat down in the seat, still warm from the body of the man she had just deposed. The coup was complete. She was now, in every sense of the word, in charge. "Good morning, gentlemen," she began, her voice calm and steady as she surveyed the broken men before her. "I trust you have all had an opportunity to read the papers. And more importantly, I hope you have had some time to reflect on the profound discrepancy between the glowing profit reports you so eagerly approved and the grim financial reality my audit team has uncovered." On cue, Rachel Cohen, acting with the efficient, dispassionate air of a seasoned executioner, moved around the table, placing a thick, spiral-bound folder in front of each board member. The cover of each folder was stark white, bearing only the Apex Ventures logo. Inside was a meticulously compiled summary of the forensic audit. It was a symphony of corruption: names, dates, illicit wire transfers, falsified invoices, offshore account numbers. It was not an accusation, it was a conviction, printed in black and white. As the majority shareholder, holding a controlling interest of 62% in this company, Claire continued, her voice as sharp and clean as a surgeon's scalpel, "I am here to inform you that Apex Ventures will no longer tolerate the gross mismanagement, systemic corruption, and deeply toxic corporate culture that nearly drove this company to ruin 7 years ago and now threatens to finish the job. Therefore, under the authority granted to me by my controlling shares, I demand the immediate and irrevocable resignation of the entire executive board. James, Michael, and yes, Daniel as well. A shocked, indignant murmur rippled through the room. An older board member, a man named Arthur Vance, who had been a staunch ally of James for 30 years, slammed his hand on the table. "This is preposterous. You can't just fire the entire leadership. It will cause a complete panic in the market. We need a proper transition plan, a formal search for new talent." "The transition plan is already in place," Claire cut him off, her voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level. "And the new talent is already in the building." As if summoned by her words, the boardroom doors opened once more. A woman in her early 40s entered. She wore a simple, practical navy suit, and her hair was pulled back in a no-nonsense bun. Her face was etched with the lines of hard work and long hours, but her eyes, sharp and intelligent, held a fire that had long been suppressed. This was Dr. Amanda Brooks. A civil engineer with a PhD in project management from MIT, Amanda was universally acknowledged as Horizon's most competent and effective site manager. She was the one they sent in to fix the impossible projects, the one who could deliver on time and under budget when everyone else had failed. She commanded the fierce loyalty of every construction crew she ever led. Yet, in 15 years of exemplary service, she had been repeatedly passed over for promotion to the C-suite. The excuses were always vague and coded. "She's not the right cultural fit. She's too technical, not enough of a politician. We need someone who can play golf with the clients." The unspoken truth, known to everyone, was simple. She was a woman in a man's world. "Gentlemen, allow me to introduce you to Horizon Construction's new Chief Executive Officer, Dr. Amanda Brooks," Claire announced into the stunned silence. The shock in the room was a physical thing, a palpable wave of disbelief and outrage. A site manager as CEO. It was a flagrant violation of every unwritten rule of the corporate boys' club. It was heresy. "She has zero C-suite experience," another board member sputtered, his face turning a blotchy purple. "She has more experience actually building things than all of you combined," Claire shot back, her voice laced with contempt. "For years you have sat in this room, in your expensive suits, making decisions based on spreadsheets you barely understood, while Amanda was out in the field, with her hard hat on and her boots covered in dust, solving real-world problems and delivering the very projects that funded your obscene bonuses. The experience that is missing in this room, gentlemen, is not hers, it is yours." Amanda, who had stood silently by the door, now stepped forward with a quiet confidence that was more commanding than any shout. Without asking for permission, she connected her laptop to the room's projector. "If you'll excuse me, gentlemen," she said, her voice steady and clear. "This is my proposed restructuring plan for the first 100 days." What followed was not a presentation. It was a masterclass in competence. Amanda laid out a brilliant, meticulously detailed plan to slash the company's bloated overhead by eliminating the executive slush fund, the private jets, the fleet of luxury cars, the extravagant client entertainment budgets. She proposed a massive reinvestment in cutting-edge construction technology, and most importantly, in worker safety programs, which had been dangerously neglected. She then outlined a strategic pivot away from chasing politically fraught government contracts and toward the burgeoning sectors of sustainable green construction and large-scale affordable housing projects. It was a plan that ingeniously blended robust profitability with genuine social impact. Her vision was so clear, her strategy so flawlessly articulated, that the protests died in their throats. Even the vultures in the room in their death throes could not help but recognize the eagle that had just landed. While the new horizon was being born in that boardroom, Daniel's world was completing its collapse. Fired, disgraced, his reputation in tatters, and his so-called friends now treating him like a leper, he was utterly alone. One evening, he ambushed Claire in the underground garage of their penthouse, his once commanding 6-foot frame now slumped and defeated. "Claire, I've lost everything," he said, his voice breaking. "My job, my network, and no one will even take my calls. I have nothing left. Please." He took a hesitant step toward her. "Give me a chance. A low-level consulting gig at Horizon. Anything. Just a fresh start." Claire looked at him under the cold, unforgiving fluorescent lights of the garage. The man who had laughed at her humiliation now begged for scraps from the table she now commanded. The irony was so thick, so perfect, it was almost painful. "A fresh start," she echoed, her voice devoid of any warmth or pity. "I spent 22 years as your shadow, Daniel. I worked backstage in the dark, making sure the spotlight always stayed on you. I have been invisible enough for both of us." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle on him. "Now, it's your turn." She walked past him without a second glance, her footsteps echoing in the cavernous space, leaving him alone in the dim light, a man finally and completely drowned in the silence and irrelevance he had once so casually imposed upon her. The reversal was absolute. The months following the boardroom coup were a whirlwind of deconstruction and rebirth. Under the steady, visionary leadership of Dr. Amanda Brooks, Horizon Construction underwent a transformation that was nothing short of miraculous. It was a painful and meticulous process. Amanda, with Claire's unwavering support, moved through the company like a master surgeon, excising the cancerous tumors of corruption and waste that had metastasized over years of neglect and greed. The executive slush funds were eliminated, the private jet was sold, and the bloated expense accounts were replaced with a system of strict, transparent accountability. The savings were astronomical, and they were immediately reinvested into the heart of the company, its people and its projects. Worker safety, once a line item to be minimized, became a top priority. Investment in sustainable technology and innovative building materials soared. The company culture, once a toxic boys' club built on backroom deals and locker room humor, was systematically dismantled and rebuilt on a foundation of meritocracy, respect, and transparency. The results were staggering. Horizon didn't just survive, it thrived. Profits, driven by a newfound efficiency and a stellar public reputation, hit record highs. The company, once a pariah, became a celebrated case study at Harvard Business School, a textbook example of how diversity, ethical leadership, and social responsibility could become powerful drivers of profitability. Meanwhile, Claire deliberately stepped back from the day-to-day operations. Her war was won. Her purpose now lay not in running an empire, but in building a legacy. The fire of her vengeance, she realized, had been a tool for demolition. Now she needed to use its embers to forge something new, something that would give meaning to the long, silent years of her own erasure. This was the genesis of the Phoenix Foundation. It was more than a charity. It was a declaration of intent, a testament to her own resurrection, and a beacon of hope for the countless other women who, like her, had been reduced to ashes by societal expectations, domestic sacrifices, and the quiet, insidious theft of their own ambitions. With an initial endowment of $50 million drawn from her personal profits from the new thriving Horizon, the foundation was established with a clear and potent mission to provide the scholarships, mentorships, and seed capital necessary for women who had stepped away from their careers to re-enter the workforce and reclaim their dreams. The foundation's headquarters was a beautifully restored brownstone in Manhattan's Flatiron district, its elegant facade a symbol of female power, now occupying a prominent place in the city's landscape. The stories of its first beneficiaries were echoes of Claire's own journey, each one a testament to the vast untapped reservoir of female talent that society so often squandered. There was Lisa, a 50-year-old architect with a degree from Columbia, who had spent 2 decades designing nothing more ambitious than her friend's kitchen renovations after leaving a promising firm to raise her children. With a grant and mentorship from the Phoenix Foundation, she launched her own boutique firm specializing in sustainable urban architecture. Within a year, her first project, a low-income housing unit with a zero-carbon footprint, had won a prestigious National Design Award. There was Maria, a brilliant software engineer who had left the high-paced world of tech to care for her ailing father. When she tried to return, she found the doors closed, her skills deemed obsolete, her 5-year absence a black mark on her resume. The foundation funded an intensive retraining program at a top coding bootcamp. Today, she was the lead developer for a successful healthcare tech startup, creating the very kind of life-saving software she had once only dreamed of. Each success story was another brick in the edifice of Claire's new legacy. Her name, once whispered with a mixture of fear and contempt in the country clubs and Hampton's garden parties of her former life, was now spoken with reverence and gratitude in classrooms, boardrooms, and workshops across the country. She was no longer just the woman who had toppled a corrupt empire. She was the woman who was building a new one, an empire of empowerment rooted in the fertile ground of second chances. The business magazines that had once plastered Daniel's face on their covers as a titan of industry now clamored for interviews with her, the Phoenix of Wall Street. While Claire's star ascended, Daniel's plummeted into a deep and desolate obscurity. At 52, he was a ghost in the world he had once commanded. His name was toxic, his network of contacts had dissolved overnight, and his reputation was irrevocably stained. No major firm would touch him. He was the man whose own wife had exposed him as at best a fool, and at worst a complicit fraud. The humiliation was a permanent, unerasable brand on his resume. To survive, he became a freelance consultant, a lone wolf scrambling for small projects from mid-tier companies in the suburbs, firms that were either too busy or too indifferent to scrutinize his past. The sprawling Upper East Side penthouse was sold. He now lived in a modest one-bedroom rental in a nondescript part of Brooklyn. The Bentley was a distant memory, replaced by a financed sedan. The extravagant dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants gave way to solitary takeout meals eaten in front of the television. On a good month, he now earned a fraction of what his old expense account used to cover. But the financial degradation, steep as it was, paled in comparison to the crushing loss of status, the suffocating cloak of irrelevance. He who had once strode through the halls of Horizon like a king now had to fight for a sliver of attention from junior managers half his age who treated him with a polite, dismissive condescension. He who had laughed at Claire for doing nothing now knew the profound soul-crushing weight of a silent phone and an empty calendar. He finally, viscerally, understood what it meant to be judged, measured, and found wanting by the world's indifferent eyes. Their paths crossed only once more, a year after the gala, a chance encounter in a midtown deli. Claire, dressed in comfortable yoga pants and a simple t-shirt after a class, was grabbing a bagel. She looked relaxed, vibrant, and years younger than she had a year ago. Daniel, in a slightly worn suit, his briefcase clutched in his hand like a shield, was likely on his way to pitch for some meager contract. Their eyes met over the glass counter filled with salads and pastries. In his face, Claire saw no anger, no lingering resentment. She saw only a deep, bone-weary exhaustion and a bitter, hollowed-out resignation. He gave her a faint, almost imperceptible nod, then turned and vanished into the anonymous morning crowd. There was nothing left to say. True justice, Claire realized in that moment, was not a loud, dramatic event. It was the slow, silent, inexorable rebalancing of the universe. A year had passed. Time, that relentless sculptor, had carved a new reality. Horizon was a paragon of ethical success. The Phoenix Foundation was transforming hundreds of lives, and Claire Bennett was a celebrated icon of female power. But victory, she had learned, has a strange and lonely echo. On the world stage, it was met with thunderous applause. In the corridors of power, it was met with deep respect, but at home, in the vast, silent expanse of her new, minimalist penthouse overlooking Central Park, it was met with a profound and deafening silence. The marriage was a distant memory, its dissolution a swift and clinical formality. Their daughter Sarah, now 22 and a recent graduate, had accepted a job in Chicago. The move, Claire knew, was not just about professional ambition. It was an act of self-preservation, an escape from the emotional wreckage of her parents' war, from a family name now forever linked to a story of betrayal and spectacular revenge. They spoke on the phone every Sunday, their conversations filled with a genuine but cautious affection, like two people carefully navigating a room full of broken glass. Sarah loved her mother, admired her strength with a fierce pride, but she also mourned the simpler, if illusory, family she had lost. Claire's war for her own soul had claimed an innocent casualty, her daughter's uncomplicated past. Her old social circle, the constellation of wives and executives she had spent 2 decades carefully cultivating, had vanished as if they had never existed. The women she had once considered friends now avoided her gaze at charity luncheons, their smiles tight and fearful. To them, Claire was not a hero to be emulated. She was a terrifying cautionary tale, a ghost at their banquet. She was the living proof that the silent, smiling woman beside them might be harboring a secret kingdom and a sharp axe. By liberating herself, she had shattered their unspoken pact. To suffer in silence, to maintain appearances, to never, ever rock the boat. Her freedom was their nightmare. One Saturday night, Claire stood alone on her wide terrace, a glass of fine Bordeaux in her hand, the city lights of Manhattan spread out before her like a carpet of fallen stars. It was a view of absolute power, of ultimate conquest. She owned this horizon in every sense of the word. But victory, she mused, was a cold and solitary companion. She had gained the world, but lost the comforting, if false, illusion of a safe harbor. She had earned the respect of thousands, but lost the easy intimacy of a few. A faint, bittersweet smile touched her lips. She thought of the woman she had been that night at the Waldorf a year ago. The woman who smiled through public humiliation, who instinctively shrank herself to fit into the small spaces allotted to her, whose sense of self-worth was precariously hinged on her husband's approval. That woman was dead and buried, and Claire did not miss her. The sting of loneliness was real, a sharp, clean pain, but it was the price of authenticity. The pain she had lived with before was a slow, septic poison, a gangrene of the soul that had forced her to smile while she was rotting from the inside out. She raised her glass, not to the glittering city, not to her hard-won triumphs, but to herself, to the woman she finally saw, clear and whole in the reflection of the glass. Being feared and free, she knew with an unshakable certainty, was infinitely better than being loved and erased. The love she had known had been a cage, a conditional contract that demanded her disappearance as its primary clause. This freedom, even in its profound loneliness, was unconditional. It was hers, earned by fire and by right. As the first, pale fingers of dawn began to stretch across the sky, painting the clouds in delicate shades of purple and orange, Claire felt a sense of peace settle over her. It was not the giddy, effervescent feeling of happiness, which she now knew to be a fleeting visitor. It was something deeper, more solid. It was the peace of acceptance. She did not know what new battles or what unexpected joys the future held, but she knew, with a certainty that warmed her from the inside out, that she would face it all as herself, not as someone's wife, not as a silent partner, not as a shadow, but as Claire Bennett. With a quiet, knowing smile, she toasted the woman who, after a lifetime of waiting in the wings, had finally, irrevocably, taken center stage. What did you think of this story? Leave your rating from 0 to 10. What score would you give it? Subscribe to the channel and click on the bell to stay up to date with all our stories. And don't forget to watch more amazing stories by clicking on the right.